Hey everybody, this is my last video on computer architecture and hardware. I know it's kind of been a long week. We cover a lot of information in these videos, but we're almost done, and so buckle in. We've already talked about von Neumann's architecture and the four pieces of that: the processor, the memory, the inputs, outputs. And remember in the first video, I said you also need some other stuff, obviously. If I put a processor over in one corner of the room and I put a hard drive in the other corner with a RAM stick next to it, and I put some keyboards and mice behind me here and a monitor over there, I don't have a computer, right? I have pieces of a computer, but I don't yet have a computer, because the next thing I have to do is I have to connect them all together, and I have to create a way, not just to plug them into each other, but for them to communicate across those lines. And if you remember from the first video, that way is called bus lines, the actual lines that transport data. And I showed you some examples of some. They come in all shapes and sizes, but bus lines must connect everything together. The way they do that is via a metronome or a clock. And so a clock is another thing you need. You need a way to pulse information across those lines. And so those of you who are musicians, you know what a metronome is. It's something that keeps the beat. Most computers, like all computers, have some form of a metronome inside of it. And that's actually how they kind of tell time as well. And so you need a beat. You need a pulse. You need something that's regulating the pulse. Those of you who maybe are familiar with the engine on a car, you know that there's a timing chain in a car to regulate the explosions of the gasoline which moves the wheel. It's kind of the same concept in a computer. You need a clock, and the clock operates off of what's called a fetch execute cycle, meaning that each beat is either fetch or execute. So and it beats very, very, very quickly, millions of times a second. And so so it grabs and then it executes, and then it grabs something information, then it does something with that information. Then it grabs, does, and it does this across the bus lines. And now the bus lines themselves come with three different things that they do, three different pulses, if you will, three different cycles and circuits. The first is that fetch execute cycle with the clock. So grab, do, it's also called the control. It controls the flow of information. And so that's the first signal that comes across bus lines, is a control signal. That's the clock. It's controlling where the information and the rate at which the information is coming. Then you have an address signal, and the address signal says to whatever is receiving, this is where the information should come from. And so if I were to tell you, go get the piece of paper, I tell this to my kids all the time, go get the piece of paper that's on the printer in the office. That's an address signal. I'm signaling to my children that there is a piece of paper with information on the office. It's the exact same way on a bus line in a computer. It says there's information stored to this spot on the hard drive or on the RAM. Go grab it. And so the second signal is the address signal. And then the third signal is just the data signal. It's just the actual data coming across. And so think of it this way. The control establishes the link and establishes the rated information. The address says this is where the information should come from, and then the information comes. And so you have those three signals on your bus lines conducting across, and it's all happening by the clock, by the fetch execute cycle, and that connects your computer together, and that's how it all runs together. And so you also need a power source, which I mentioned. Hopefully that goes without saying. It's also a good idea, I said earlier, to have some fans on your computer, because anything that runs on electricity gets warm, because electricity is heat, it's energy. So you also need some fans, some radiators. Some computers have radiators too, which pull heat away and blow it into the fan. And so that's your basic architecture. I know that this has been rudimentary. This has just been a really brief kind of fly through, but I hope it at least has whetted your appetite and made you more curious. If you go to college, take some hardware classes. It's fascinating how all these hardware things work together. So good luck on the quiz if you're in the advanced class. Don't forget to do the computer buying project if you're not in the advanced class, and I'm available if you need me.